Hi everyone, I just wanted to come in and make an updated video going over these photosynthesis slides. So you can find the slides on Blackboard and you can pull up this video. I do highly recommend that you watch this video. And let's go ahead and get started. So first off, let's remember that energy cannot be created or destroyed based on the first law of thermodynamics, right? But it can change form, right? So our energy comes in from the sun. So this is a form of kinetic energy, right? So our sunlight comes into this energy cycle, and our plants capture this sunlight using photosynthesis. And photosynthesis generates a couple of things. It generates oxygen and sugar, right? So it generates oxygen and sugar we know from our last section is full of potential energy, right? Glucose has these carbon bonds, these covalent bonds between the carbon molecules, and that gives it a lot of potential energy. Now, when cellular respiration occurs, and this occurs in most organisms, then this sugar molecule those covalent bonds get broken, energy gets released and converted into ATP. It's converted into ATP, which is our cellular energy that gets used for cellular tasks. Now, cellular respiration produces some byproducts, and those are carbon dioxide and water. And if you look at our cycle, that carbon dioxide and that water goes right back into our cycle because those are the reactants in our photosynthesis reaction. So let's think back to our membranes. We have biological membranes, and we have two types of diffusion that can occur with our biological membranes. We have simple diffusion, and if you recall, that is when molecules can pass through the selectively permeable membrane on their own without assistance. That is simple diffusion, and this goes from high concentration to low concentration, so it does not need energy. And then we have facilitated diffusion, which uses a transport protein in the membrane, and that membrane protein allows molecules to pass through the membrane that would not be able to pass unassisted. You can recall our worksheet that we have on Blackboard, where you can explore the traits of molecules that can and cannot pass through our selectively permeable membrane. I highly recommend that you work on that assignment and submit it. Now, neither of these use energy. So neither uses energy. Okay? Now, we have one more type of transport, and that is active transport. So active transport, it requires the use of a protein, and it requires cellular energy, or ATP. So that ATP comes in here, and it breaks one bond between two of its phosphate groups. Remember, it has 3 phosphate groups, and it leaves here as a DP. A DP, which means diphosphate, which equals 2, right? So up here, we have triphosphate, which equals 3. We have diphosphate, which equals 2. So that is our low energy version of this molecule. And that energy gets used to pump these molecules across the membrane into an area of high concentration. So in this transport, we are going from low to high, And this uses energy, right? It uses ATP. Okay. Okay, now, something that is very important when we talk about photosynthesis and respiration is our electron transport chain. An electron transport chain is a series of proteins embedded in a biological membrane. And one side, so this is usually occurring in an organelle. And we're going to have an electron donor, and that donor gives a high-powered electron, a high-energy electron, so high energy, to our first protein in the chain. And then as that energy, as that electron gets passed through the chain, it's losing energy gradually, right? And so we end up with a low energy electron over here, and that gets accepted by our electron acceptor. Now, along that way, we see that our electron is losing energy, but that energy is not getting destroyed, right? It can't be destroyed. So where is the energy going? And if you think about that for a second, you might remember that our energy in our cells is ATP. So a lot of times these electron transport chains are being used to generate ATP. Okay. Now, this is the clicker question, so think about this for a second, take a guess. The most important plant in the Arkansas economy is rice. So rice is a huge crop here in Arkansas. If you are familiar with the FDA facility around Pine Bluff, they do a lot of research on rice because it is such an important crop here. So let's think for a moment. If Arkansas farmers produce more than 9 billion pounds of rice each year, which process is contributing to rice biomass? How are we getting that 9 billion pounds of rice biomass? Now, biomass is all of the matter in an organism, right? Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. Our first option is absorption of mineral substances through the soil via the roots, absorption of organic substances from the soil via the roots, incorporation of CO2 gas from the atmosphere into molecules by leaves, incorporation of H2O from the soil into molecules by leaves, and E, absorption of solar radiation into the leaf. So think about this for a moment. Which one of these processes is responsible for this increase in mass in our rice as the plant grows, as it produces these grains of rice? So let's think. From the soil, what are we getting, right? From the soil, we are getting minerals. From the soil, we are getting minerals. We are getting water. Are we getting something that can make biomolecules? Not really. Now, solar radiation, right? Solar radiation does not have biological matter, right? Solar radiation is a form of radiation, right? So this is radiation energy, right? So that's not going to be responsible for the mass that is being made in the rice. So a lot of this mass is made up of carbohydrates, right? And what do we need to make carbohydrates? It is carbon. So we're actually getting the majority of the carbon from carbon dioxide in the air. Right, so our correct answer here between these three, go ahead and think about that. Which one is responsible for the biomass. Okay, and then what organelle is going to be capturing this carbon and making it into sugars or carbohydrates? Right. Okay, so take a moment and think about that. What organelle is capturing carbon, using light energy, and making sugars or carbohydrates? Okay, go ahead and answer that in iClicker. Now, let's take a look at this diagram on the right. So, in our plants, because we're talking about plants here, in our plants we have leaves, right? Our leaves are, they're green, they are the part of the plant that usually takes in the light. And leaves are made up of cells, okay? So they're made up of cells here, and these cells are organized, right? So this is a leaf, and it's got layers and layers of cells. But if we look at a singular cell, we can see these large green portions of the cell. Now, those are organelles. Specifically, they are chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are the reason that plant cells can take in light and take in carbon dioxide and produce sugars and carbohydrates. So if we look at our chloroplast here, one thing about chloroplasts is that it has 2 layers of membranes. Okay, so it has an outside layer that separates it from the cell at large, and then it has these inside layers. And this gives the chloroplast its own internal area where it can produce concentration gradients, right? So this space in what are called these grana stacks, right? This is called a lumen, okay? That lumen is very important. Now let's talk about why. What is the overall reaction of photosynthesis? So I am going to make this a clicker question. So I want you to, let's see, we're going to have, we're going to have A, and this is not being written on the, actually, I can do this better. Let's do this on our, over here. Ooh, nope. It's not letting me change my display. Okay, then I'll just have to write it here. Okay, so A, CO2, B, H2O, C, O2, D, C6H12O6, and E, sunlight. Okay? So we're going to do some iClicker questions. The reactants, let's see, carbon dioxide for the first question. Is carbon dioxide on the reactant side or the product side? Okay, and then we're going to do water. Is water on the reactant side or the product side? And then oxygen. Is oxygen on the reactant side or the product side? This molecule right here, this is glucose. Is glucose on the reactant side or the product side? And lastly, we have sunlight. Now, is sunlight on the reactant side or the product side, or is it somewhere else? So think about that for a second. So we're going to have 5 questions here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So answer reactant or product for each of those 5 iClicker questions, except for sunlight, where you might want to think a little bit further. Is it a reactant, a product, or is it something else? Okay. Yeah, I will fix the formatting when I upload the iClicker slides. So just take a look at your iClicker slide to get the correct format for these questions. Okay, so here is the reaction, right? So we have, over on this side, we have our reactants. We have carbon dioxide and we have water, right? Water, we'll go over where those come from in a moment. So then on our product side, we have oxygen gas and we have glucose, right? And our solar energy, we list it in the middle because it's an energy input. Whenever we are writing reactions, our energy input and output go along this central arrow, okay? So let's switch back to pen. We'll go here. So let's think about this for a moment. So we talked about carbon dioxide. Where do we get our carbon dioxide from? We get it from the air, right? So air has CO2, and that CO2 goes into the leaves. Now our water is going to come from the soil. So it's going to go in through the roots. Now in our products, we have oxygen, and oxygen, where do we think it's going to come out from? Well, it is going to come out from the leaves. So the leaves are doing what's called gas exchange. Carbon dioxide comes in, oxygen goes out. And last is our glucose, and the glucose is going to stay inside the plant. And it's going to be used for a lot of things. It's going to be used for cellulose and starch and fructose. So this is for structure. This is for energy storage. And then fructose, you'll find it in fruits. Okay. Let's take a look at our chloroplast and these 2 sets of reactions that photosynthesis has. So photosynthesis is composed of light reactions and carbon reactions. So on our light reactions side, we have our water coming in. So water comes into the light reactions, and we have light coming in here. So this is our light. Our sun is coming in. It's getting captured in these light reactions, and we are producing our oxygen here. So this water is actually going to be donating, it's going to be involved in the electron transport chain. We get our electrons, they pass through, and we get our oxygen from there, but we also get ATP from there. So our ATP, our energy molecule, is coming out of the light reactions, okay? Now, our carbon reactions, this is where our CO2 gets used. Our CO2 that comes from the air, right? It's going into the leaves, into the chloroplasts, and it's going to be fixed. So this is called carbon fixation. Carbon fixation. Now, carbon fixation, we take that carbon dioxide and we make it into a sugar molecule, specifically glucose, right? Now, this side of the reaction uses ATP. So we can see our ATP molecule here goes into this reaction. And what comes out is a DP. This is our low energy version of the molecule. So light reaction side is making our cellular energy from sunlight. Carbon reaction side is making glucose using cellular energy. Okay? So the other aspect of this that might help you remember, the light reaction side is the photo portion of our reaction, photo meaning light, and the carbon side is the synthesis portion of our reaction. So photosynthesis, light reactions, carbon reactions. Okay, so and in our case, our light energy is kinetic energy, and our ATP is potential energy, right? So we are converting kinetic energy from sunlight into potential energy in ATP, okay? Okay, so this is a closer look at what our light reactions look like. This is very complicated and has a lot of moving parts, and you will not need to memorize this. I want you to pay attention to what proteins are involved here, and I want you to pay attention to the energy levels and the concentration gradients, okay? So our proteins, we have photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. So these are often abbreviated PS. So PS2 and PS1. These capture our light. Okay, and they do so using a pigment, and that pigment is chlorophyll. Okay. Now, that light energy, it excites electrons through the use of water, right? So here's our water coming in. Now, we get our electrons. Those electrons have a lot of energy, and they're going to be losing energy as they follow this yellow arrow. That energy is going to be given to this protein right here. Now, what does this protein look like? It is a transport protein. Remember, we talked about how we have proteins that assist in diffusion, and we have proteins assisting in active transport. This is an active transport situation. We have a low concentration of hydrogen on one side, and we have a high concentration of hydrogen on the inside of the lumen. This is the lumen that I was talking about earlier. So we have energy coming in, and that energy is being used to pump hydrogen ions from low concentration to high concentration. Now, think back to what we talked about when with biological membranes and what molecules can and cannot pass through membranes. Ions, charged atoms, cannot pass through membranes unassisted. Okay, so when this pump pulls the hydrogen ions into the lumens, it is trapped here. It is trapped inside this lumen, and the only way for it to leave is through this protein right here, ATP synthase. Now, ATP synthase is kind of like a generator or an engine, okay? So our hydrogen ions are passing through this ATP synthase, and think of them like wind in a windmill, okay? So they are passing through, they are making this ATP synthase spin, and it does actually spin. And that energy from the potential energy from this gradient, this is potential energy, we are getting kinetic energy in ATP synthase, and that kinetic energy is being made back into potential energy in ATP. Okay, so the hydrogen ions are like the wind in our windmill, and they're helping us generate ATP. So the big things here, we have our photosystems capturing light, we have our transport protein, which is making our gradient, and we have ATP synthase, which is making ATP. Okay, so this is our light reaction summed up. Let's move on to our carbon reactions. So, in our carbon reactions, now answer this quick clicker question. Where does the carbon come from? in our carbon reactions. We have carbon coming in to the plant, into the chloroplast. Where is it coming from? Go ahead and answer in iClicker, and we will move on. So if we look at our diagram over here, it's a little bit hard to see. We have carbon dioxide coming in. This is 3 carbon dioxide, and that is coming in. This cyclic diagram here, we have carbon fixation, and then we are going to be making P-gal. Okay, so carbon dioxide, and let's see, let's move on to our next slide. Yeah, okay, so go ahead and answer this in iClicker. How many carbons enter the cycle in one round of the cycle? How many carbons are coming in? Okay, and in what form? Okay, so let's talk about what happens with these carbons. So we have 3 carbon dioxides coming in. So we have CO2, 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 right? How many carbons is this? It is 3 carbons, okay? So we have our first carbon, our second carbon, our third carbon. Now, we have sort of a carbon molecule base in this cycle that helps us change the shapes of these molecules in a way that is energetically favorable. So, but all we need to remember here is that these 3 carbons get put into a molecule called P-gal. P-gal is a 3 carbon molecule. Okay, you can see that with these gray spheres. We have 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 carbons. So 3 carbons from carbon dioxide coming in, making a 3 carbon molecule. However, thing that we know coming from photosynthesis, we know it is glucose, and glucose is a 6 carbon molecule, C6H12O6, C6H12O6. So if we have 6 carbons in glucose, and we have 3 carbons in P-gal, and 3 carbon dioxides going into the cycle, how many turns of this cycle are needed to make a molecule of glucose? Go ahead and answer that in iClicker. Okay, now we're going to think back about how our carbon interactions interact with our light interactions. So we have what is being used is our carbon here. We have carbon being used, and we have ATP being used. ATP is coming into the reaction here. Okay, ATP is going in, and then ADP is coming out. Okay, ADP is coming out. Okay, and there's a typo here in this other molecule, but we are not really going to need to know much about that molecule. Okay, so is ATP produced in our carbon reactions? Is ATP produced in our carbon reactions? Okay, so we'll make this 3 questions. So this is question 1, question 2, and question 3. So answer this one, yes or no, for the carbon reactions. Okay, is ATP produced in the carbon reactions, yes or no? Now, second question, ADP is leaving and will be recycled. Is this true or false? Okay, is ADP leaving and going to be recycled? You look up at our little full diagram up here at the top. You might take a look at that to try and get that answer. And then our last thing is a 5 carbon molecule recycled? Yes or no? Okay, now take a look here. This is cyclical. And we have this molecule that is going back into the reaction. Remember, we have to have this base carbon molecule in order for these reactions to continue. Okay? So, a 5-carbon molecule called RuBP is being recycled. It's getting changed by Rubisco over and over in this cycle. Okay, so answer questions 1, 2, and 3, and answer in question 3, yes, a 5-carbon molecule is being recycled. It is RuBP. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about is how this impacts our environment. So we know that plants are fixing carbon. They are taking carbon dioxide from the air and they are putting it into their physical structures, right? And eventually these plants are going to die, they're going to decay, and pressure and heat are going to turn them into coal, right? And we use a lot of coal and fossil fuels already, and that is carbon from millions and millions of years ago, from plants that decayed millions and millions of years ago. So, what biomolecules were present in these plants? Our 4 biomolecules: lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. Well, let's think about this. Lipids, are they present in current plants? Yes, they are present in the membranes. Okay, they are present in membranes. Carbohydrates? Yes, because we are making glucose in photosynthesis. Proteins? Yes, because we have photosystems and transport proteins and ATP synthase. And we have nucleic acids, and we know that those are present because ATP is a nucleic acid, and we need to have DNA in order to make proteins. So in these plants, all of these biomolecules are present. So when we are burning fossil fuels, coal and oil, we are breaking the covalent bonds between the carbons. So when we break those bonds, we are releasing energy. So let's say we have our glucose here. We break these bonds and we get energy. So we are taking this from potential to kinetic, okay? And that's what we use to power our cars, our electricity, our heaters, things like that. So potential energy from carbons gets changed into kinetic energy. Now, when we do that, we get carbon released from the coal, right? It was in a solid form in the coal. It is being released, and it's being released in the form of carbon dioxide. So as we are burning fossil fuels, we're releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Plants use carbon dioxide and they fix it and they put it back into that stable structural form, that glucose or the cellulose. And my last question for today is, we are releasing carbon dioxide and plants are capturing carbon dioxide. Now, atmospheric carbon dioxide in our world is increasing over time, causing us to see these climate change differences that we are observing, more irregular weather events happening more often. Now, is the carbon that we are releasing from burning fuels greater than, less than, or equal to the carbon that is being captured by plants today, in our environment today? And think about that for a moment. And does this mean, so if we think about that, so CO2 release and CO2 capture. Okay, so for this to be increasing in our environment, the CO2 released has to be greater than the CO2 captured. And so that's why you see a lot of tree planting endeavors to increase our ability to capture carbon so that it is not in the atmosphere. And that is our talk for today. Here are our learning objectives for photosynthesis, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.